The Borgia themselves are pretty synonymous with corruption within the papacy, but let's cover Rodrigo for now. Rodrigo Borgia was born in Sativa or Chativa, Spain in 1431. His uncle Alphonse became the Pope in 1455 under the title of Pope Calixtus III. Calixtus, being a lawyer by trade, let's just say he wasn't exactly a moral pillar of society. Though he only lived for 3 more years after attaining the papacy, he set about securing his relatives through various sweet spot positions. Rodrigo was tapped as a cardinal with the power to vote within the College of Cardinals. At the age of 25, he was given this job. Since he hadn't been consecrated by this point, the role was formally called a lay cardinal. For someone with his age and almost no experience within the church, it was pretty ridiculous to give someone like him a job like this. And you might think it was, just another case of nepotism that was, all too common at the time. Well, almost a year later, after he's barely got enough to put on his resume, Alphonse then named Rodrigo Vice Chancellor of the entire Roman Catholic Church. 26 years old. Given how the church was already in possession of some, let's say questionable morals by this point, during his time as a vice-chancellor of the Holy See, Rodrigo pretty easily scraped together a staggering amount of wealth. This cash would definitely come in handy in the years to come. Well, fast forward a few years, 1458, Alphonse kicks the bucket. There isn't much info on it, but I think his successors gradually shuffled Rodrigo down to lesser roles because his next major blip in his timeline was 1471 when he was finally consecrated. In 1492, Pope Sixtus died and the college had 3 candidates to choose from. The primary choices were individuals from the Sforza and Della Rovere bloodlines. There were strong political stances that each of them took up, but Rodrigo ended up as, in a sense, let's say he was almost an independent or a third-party sort of candidate in this little showdown. Now, in spite of this, he actually won the votes from the College of Cardinals to secure his position. How did he do this? Well, Rodrigo didn't spend all of his time twiddling his thumbs. He was studying the politics within the papacy, the College of Cardinals. He knew who to approach, what he could use, coerce, who to intimidate, what made them tick, and all sorts of things. He was planning this very meticulously. Now, the amount of money and underhanded politics that was exchanged during this election was absolutely otherworldly. I mean, choosing a pope was always a time when dodgy things took place, but this set a new standard. The College of Cardinals and folks in power knew that all 3 of these candidates, however, were as crooked as a Virginia fence post. I mean, at this point, to become pope, you almost definitely had to have skeletons in your closet. But the thing is, out of these 3, Rodrigo was really willing to make it worth their while. He quite literally bought the whole election and, as a result, the title of pope. For clarification here, there were 6 total cardinals at this time, so the amount of cash he could potentially throw at each one was very, very substantial. In fact, he didn't even pay money for all the votes. One of the cardinals was nearly 100 years old, and, his mind was gone by that point, and Rodrigo, from accounts at the time, he did something very simple to manipulate him into actually casting a vote for him, and didn't even have to use a single coin. And of course, Rodrigo was quite the scandalous fella. Case in point, way back when his uncle Calixtus III died, Pope Pius II took up the role. He didn't have any ill will towards the younger Rodrigo, but he took him aside, gave him a little bit of advice. What he said was basically, hey, Rodrigo, you should really stop having these public orgies. They're rather sinful. since you're in the church and all that. Actually, I think unseemly was the word he used. Oh, did I not mention that? Yeah, Rodrigo loved sexy parties. As a result, this guy had mistresses out the wazoo and tons of illegitimate children. Now, he doesn't look great in well, almost every painting. He kind of looks like Humpty Dumpty. Yeah, I know he does look pretty bad, but funny thing about Rodrigo, in his youth, he was said to have been, kind of a Casanova of sorts. He was tall, built, handsome, attractive, all that stuff, but when he hit his 60s, right around 1490, some sort of a fat bomb went off, resulting in him looking like this. Ugh. Anyhow, since the apple didn't fall far from the family tree, he took after his uncle's approach to nepotism. Not long after attaining the papacy, he gave very cushy roles to his then brother-in-law as well as his sons, which included Cesare, who will be of very big importance in the future without spoiling anything. One of his daughters, Lucrezia, who's also of importance, was an ideal age for marriage as he was working towards his election as a pope. Throughout the following years, he basically traded it up, I guess you could say, when it came to potential suitors for her, so that he could secure, a more advantageous political connection. He wanted to secure strong ties into many, if not all, of the city-states in hopes of controlling the entire network through his bloodlines and alliances. If you were related to Rodrigo or you were trusted by him, he would give you the absolute best position you could possibly imagine. And he wouldn't have a problem with muscling out the current occupant if he wanted to. Now, in fact, his predecessor, the ironically named Pope Innocent VIII, actually admitted to having lots of illegitimate children officially. Since he acknowledged them, he could legally give them these fancy positions and lots of cash, completely legal. Rodrigo saw this and he thought, well, you know what? I will do the exact same thing. And given his promiscuous tendencies, his clout was growing exponentially. In fact, to give you an idea of his family's reach and power, get this, the Borgia family in this era, bear in mind, across the next several centuries, consisted of at least the following: 11 cardinals, 3 popes, a queen of England, and a saint, in addition to ties reaching into the upper tiers of society within Spain, France, Italy, Greece, and England. Given this network, the tendency toward underhanded tactics in politics, and in several cases, brute force and wet work, some historians tag the Borgia as a whole as one of the first organized crime families, and it's probably not too far from the truth. Now, what sorts of brute force? Well, I mentioned that he assigned Cesare as a cardinal. He actually forced a number of them out of the college so that he could actually control it. Also, Lucrezia's engagements, well, one of them, the first one, was annulled pretty easily. The second one, the husband saw what he was getting into family-wise, and he thought, no, I can shrug off what old dad-in-law is saying to me, and if I stick through with this, I will get a ton of power. So he was going to ride it out, leaving all the innuendo aside. So he married Lucrezia. What did Rodrigo do? Well, it's said that he had Cesare put together an assassination, killing Lucrezia's recent husband so that the third suitor could immediately be lined up. This one, who she did marry, was a high-end Sforza gentleman, which gave Rodrigo easy access to controlling Milano. Of course, Lucrezia wasn't exactly a useless puppet in all this. There were times where Rodrigo would leave Rome entirely and she would actually rule in his stead. He was educating his children pretty well on wielding the power he was accruing. Additionally, on the topic of marriage, one of his sons, Joffre, was wed to Sanzia of Aragon, giving him control within Naples. He was playing a pretty well-calculated game of chess using his bloodline as key pieces, and it worked out pretty well for quite a while, but not perfectly. In 1497, his 20-year-old son, a brother to Cesare, was murdered in a Roman ghetto. This son, Giovanni Borgia, the Duke of Gandia, was found dead near a river, and he had a full coin purse. Now, given how these guys traveled with ridiculous amounts of pocket cash, it was strange that his money was not taken. In fact, the most popular suspects were either his older brother, Cesare, or his younger brother, Joffre. Rodrigo didn't suspect them, but later analysis of facts, people involved, etc. point very strongly to these two. Cesare had numerous greed or power-related motivations, whereas Cesare and Giovanni were both, they were, I guess you'd say, hopping on the good foot, doing the bad thing with Joffre's wife, Sansia, and this gave him vengeance as a motive. He probably didn't realize, if this is the case, that Cesare was also taking part. Now, following this, Rodrigo slipped into a period where he was very depressed and wanted to reform the church in his grief. But however, he didn't stick with it too long. He probably had a naughty party that cheered him up. In the years to come, Cesare and Rodrigo almost fed off each other's evil plots. The two of them were very, very similar. There were instances of them simply executing prisoners for the heck of it, or terrorizing folks who even remotely bothered them or annoyed them, politically or otherwise. In one recorded instance, a couple dozen prisoners were corralled into St. Peter's Square with guards blocking all the exits. In attendance was Rodrigo, Cesare, and Lucrezia, along with guards and such. The prisoners, of course, had no clue what was going on. Some of them thought it was a mass pardon of sorts. I mean, the Pope was there. From the balcony they were standing on, a servant handed an arquebus, or a primitive rifle, to Cesare. He took careful aim and fired at the mass of prisoners, killing one instantly. A new, freshly loaded rifle was handed to him immediately after this, and he fired again. This repeated itself until all the prisoners were dead. After the last one fell, Rodrigo just said this: "Fine aim, my son." In the interest of not spoiling stuff for the future, I'm going to skip his death, escapades of his children and such, and we'll be saving those for later. We'll close out with one creepy incident of his, though, that will be known as the Banquet of Chestnuts. Occurring a few years prior to his death, Cesare held this at his palazzo with Rodrigo in attendance. Over 50 of Rome's most attractive, expensive courtesans were brought in, and their clothing was auctioned off, one piece at a time. Once they were stripped, the servants brought in chestnuts, lined the floor with them, and the courtesans were told to, bend over and pick them up. And, well, there was a lot of bending over, and one thing led to another, and the guests took matters into their own hands. Literally. Money, goods, and fancy clothing were given as gifts to guys who, lasted the longest and went the most rounds. This might come as a surprise to y'all, but I'm quite the prude, so I'd rather not spell it out, but they were actively keeping tally and keeping scores on this stuff. This really happened. Yeah.